Okay, welcome back everybody. It's 5/19 of 2015. We're going to take a look at the second major topic in the Hebrew Bible. It's Lacocque's turn again, and we're going to address the Decalogue, or the Covenant of the Law, which is that first moment after we evolve from the teleology of the implantated and incarnated Kephale wisdom, which was incarnated in creation at the very moment of creation. Now, how does that teleology unfold? It unfolds in the Hebrew Bible through the mediation of covenant, a covenant relationship between God the Creator and the nation of Israel. And so it becomes a covenant of grace and participation of obedience. But Lacocque wants to look at the Decalogue as a covenant, as a treaty of obedience, and then finally he wants to look at it as that fulfillment of the teleology of the incarnated Kephale wisdom. And so he calls it a teleology of grace and obedience. The first moment, looking at the Decalogue as covenant, it always references Yahweh as the God of the covenant. The Sinai proclamation imprints the Exodus experience, so the liturgical communal celebration is informed actually by Sinai proclamation. There is an interrogation of Israel and an invitation to obedience from Yahweh in the Sinai proclamation, and the heteronomy of the law and Israel's autonomy passes through this mediation of covenant. But there's always the continued presence of divine call and human implication. From covenant, we can look at the civil emphasis, the emphasis of trying to organize, protect, and order society through the Decalogue. There are 13 aspects according to Lacocque. It is a slanted presentation. It's not of equal parties. It's only drafted on one side, but the parties are metaphorically described as being in a family relationship because they are enjoined against a common enemy, which in our case would be chaos or kakos, moral evil. There is a particularization of obligations. There are many conditional phrases used in the law covenant, but the covenant is prioritized even though you have this presentation of a treaty of obedience, a decalogue of obedience. Third person witnesses are not mentioned. The civil concern is the primary concern. It has a prohibitive theme, but social ordering takes priority, and protection of society is a priority. There is a little bit of a borrowed Oriental wisdom from Egypt, but the key moment here is that Israel is transitioning out of myth and heading toward what we know to be wisdom literature. This is the transition period. The covenant of the law is a transition period from the mythological creation to the more historical wisdom literature, and there's a transition of a covenant of law. But that's part of the teleology, according to Lacocque. And so he says, for his third moment, he wants to combine covenant and obedience and talk about the teleology of that incarnated Kephale wisdom of the Creator and how we participate to bring that forward. So the Decalogue is not negative, even though it has prohibitive elements. Covenant is prioritized. There's a tension that exists between promise and commandment. It's not just commandment. There is the backdrop of promise. So covenant becomes based in this Sinai proclamation. But it is a dialectic between gift and duty that defines the covenant. And he says Deuteronomy is key because it presents a shift from the initial moment of exile to the closing moment of exile, or the eschatological end of exile. So the Deuteronomy shift is key, and we start keying in on the promised land in the Deuteronomy shift. So in Deuteronomy, command always presupposes promised future, and a relational covenant with God is emphasized. And so the teleology is one of grace and obedience, always being in a dialectical relationship. And identity eventually emerges in Deuteronomy of covenant, also meaning commandment. And communal life obviously comes to the forefront, and the communal consequences of this relational covenant. So, lo and behold, Lacocque says that narrative comes on the scene. This communal narrative takes on significance, and the Deuteronomy school becomes the mediation that kind of mediates between the covenant and narrative. So narrative points to the exemplary laws, but law points to the paradigm of narrative literary content. So it's a teleology that is tension between law and narrative. Law informs narrative, and narrative informs law. But law is equated with covenant. Covenant actually is the proper backdrop rather than commandment. So for Lacocque, to say law in the Hebrew tradition is to say covenant. And it's very much in dialogue with the narrative of the Jewish nation. The narrative of Israel informs the covenant. The covenant reciprocally also emphasizes the paradigm type nature of narrative. And so it becomes a dialectical teleology that unfolds as that transition point of moving away from the mythological and toward the wisdom literature. But before we get to the wisdom literature, we're going to pass through this covenant of the law and the Decalogue. But Lacocque, and I'm sure later we'll find out Ricoeur, very much want to emphasize narrative and language, and the law, the covenant of law, is very much involved in a dialectical relationship with the narrative, according to Lacocque. So covenant and treaty become reciprocally combined in a teleology which is historical between grace and obedience, gift and obedience. So quite a few good points that he gave us here. Just an initial backdrop, kind of the way we developed last time. He gave us 3 lessons last time with creation. The first was the general backdrop, and he's done the same here. He's just giving us a triad framework, and we'll move on from there in the next lesson.